Good afternoon. I'm Karen Merrill, and I'm delighted to present the January Lunch and Learn on what stress and diet have in common. January brings the new year and often renewed commitments to self-care practice and healthy eating. This year, particularly with COVID restrictions, increased stress, and restrictions that kept us inside the house a great deal of the time with proximity to the kitchen and refrigerator, the topic of stress and diet seemed an appropriate choice. Next slide. So to start this off, we're going to ask this question. What do weight and stress have in common? The answer is cortisol, this powerful hormone. So you'll be hearing more about this in the presentation, but the bottom line is that stress and cortisol are related, and we'll show how high levels of cortisol affect weight gain and chronic stress. At this point, suffice it to say that cortisol controls how our body processes carbs, fats, and proteins. It's actually the hormone that protects us. So once we get stressed, our heart starts pounding and our adrenaline rises with that fight or flight mode, then cortisol kicks in and starts to kind of store fat because they're afraid it gets a signal that maybe we'll be without food for a while. Now, this kind of process made a lot of sense when we were living in the jungle and we might come upon a saber-toothed tiger when we would go into fight or flight mode. The problem is today, our body doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger or deadlines. So we can react to stress in the same ways that raise hormones that come back to haunt us. Next slide. So we'll be looking at what normal stress and chronic stress look like, the effects that this stress has on hormones, how and why that affects weight. We're going to look at emotional eating and then what nutrients are depleted by stress and what are needed to replace that. And we'll talk about some stress management strategies. Next. So normal stress, psychological and physical reaction to a situation. These everyday stressors can be managed with healthy stress behaviors. Chronic stress is more of a prolonged emotional pressure, goes on for a long period of time, makes us feel as if we have no control over the situation. And it's at this point our bodies react by increasing stress hormone production. We think of normal stress as more situational, starting a new job, getting married, shuffling kids around activities. It can be something that is akin to a situation, but overall that's resolved and the feelings subside and go away. We can have strategies that prioritize, like making lists and seeing ourselves accomplish it. Stress is our body's natural physical and psychological response to anything we perceive as overwhelming. So the day-to-day demands of our life, whether pleasant or unpleasant, can cause stress. It's how we meet those demands. It's chronic stress that causes more of a problem. It contributes to health conditions, which we'll talk more about, including anxiety, insomnia, even high blood pressure, to name a few. And unfortunately, all these conditions can weaken our immune system. The stress hormones are elevated, will stay at that level, and cause the body to become in an inflamed state. And we hear a lot about inflammation and what happens in that state. So next, so in looking at the effects of stress on our body, we probably all can relate to being in a situation where our heart starts to beat more rapidly and we start to breathe more from our upper chest. So under stress, that heart pumps faster to try to protect us. And stress hormones cause the blood vessels to constrict and divert more oxygen to our muscles so that we'll have more strength if we need to in that flight or fight response. It also raises our blood pressure. The issue is that over time, chronic stress causes our heart to work too hard for too long. Next. So, physical signs of stress. So, here's a list of signs that our body is feeling stressed. For some people that are laid back and easygoing, they may not even pay attention to how their body's reacting. Other people are so used to living with stress that they don't pay any attention to the signs. They just think that's how they normally feel. So, as we've said, stress that stays with us for long periods weaken our immune system and making us sick. So, our body first reacts through our nervous system response, then activation of the hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And cortisol is that hormone responsible for weight gain. And adrenaline is known as the fight or flight response. So I think about it as your heart pumps faster, jacks up the adrenaline, and then the cortisol comes in to try to protect us. And at that point, that's where it's linked to weight gain because the fat remains. So being aware of how our body and what goes on in our mind reacts is a starting place in taking control of the demands and harmful effects of stress. Next. So what causes stress in your life is different than what causes mine. And what I might find is a catastrophic event, maybe a minor setback for you. So as we learn what adds to the stress in our own life is the key to controlling our stress levels. We feel the most helpless and overwhelmed when we deal with things that are outside our control. So learning what we can manage, what we need to recognize is always a really good starting place. So hopefully, as we go through this and then after the presentation, you'll reflect on what you find stressful in your daily life and how that might serve you to take control. So more on what causes stress. Next slide. So what does cause us to go into a stress mode? Certainly fear. And fear can be a physical response. Being in dangerous traffic on our morning commute or anywhere we might drive can cause stress. A dark, deserted parking lot can cause stress. Losing track of your child in the grocery store. These are reactions to what we feel like is a physical stress or risk. Psychological fears associated with stress include an inability to complete our tasks at home or at work. Very common for us in our fast-paced life today. Inability to manage finances, having relationship problems. These are fears that trigger stress. Uncertainty, certainly. In all of our lives, there's uncertainties that can change, that can cause stress. Whether we're changing jobs, whether systems change in our job, whether we're ending or starting a relationship, these are just some of the changes that cause uncertainty. Often, when change occurs, stress piles up because of the unknowns, and uncertainty and change goes hand in hand. But being uncertain about events in our life can cause us to feel like we're out of control. This feeling of being out of control is what causes the stress. Our attitudes. If you've attended many of these trainings, you probably are reminded that attitudes go a long way. A positive or negative attitude influences our reaction to stressful situations. For example, if you feel your job is worthwhile, and you may see some of the problems you encounter as challenges, seen as pluses, they might become motivators. However, if you resent your situation, feel stuck in your job, similar experiences create stress, a stress that frustrates you instead of motivating you. You may have heard the phrase that perception is everything. So depending on what has happened to you in the past and how you view resources available to you to meet life's demands affect your stress level. The degree of stress that you experience can be greatly affected by your perception of your ability to deal with it. So how you perceive a situation in any given situation will determine whether or not it's going to be stressful. We can further break down perceptions in these following ways. Self-perception. How confident am I? How do I see my self-esteem? What are my needs, my values, and my interests? What does my past experience tell me about my perceptions in terms of dealing with stress? What kind of material resources do I have? Do I have the finances available to me in times of stressful situations? And how about my support system, people resources, others that can assist you, friends, coworkers, family members, professionals? A perception of knowing that you have the employee assistance program available to you when stress becomes overwhelming is something to keep in mind. We know for sure that change causes stress. All change produces stress, even positive changes. So we think of marriage as a positive change, and it requires a period of adjustment. For some people, that adjustment can be stressful. Even a vacation, planning the activities on the vacation, totally aside from the kinds of things we have to keep in mind as a result of the COVID environment. But that kind of change can cause stress as well. So even exciting events can cause stress. Negative changes are not near as difficult to identify as stress producing. These are situations you'd rather not have to occur. Dealing with aging parents and caring for them, career changes, financial crisis, or loss of a valuable possession. Change demands our adjustment to any particular situation, whether you desire it or not. So knowing what those things are, how we react to them, can all give us the ammunition to be able to deal with them when they occur, which they will. Next. So more on our list of what stress can contribute to. We've made the connection between health conditions, heart disease, blood pressure, colitis or nervous stomach, asthma, rheumatology aspects, skin allergies, sex issues, strokes, hardening of the arteries, diabetes, fatigue, insomnia. Almost everything can be affected by stress because it affects our immune system and affects many different systems in how our body functions. Next. So stress contributes to colds and flu. If you reflect on if you get a cold every Christmas or before a major presentation at work, added stress could be the culprit. With a weakened immune system, our body is more susceptible to cold and flu viruses. So this involves building our immune system. Insomnia, which a lot of people are having issue with right now. So if we go to bed with a problem on our mind, our body gives us another shot of adrenaline every time we think about it, which when you think about it is counter to relaxing and putting ourselves in a state of calming down that allows us to drift off to sleep. We can get headaches and sore muscles. That stress reaction, known as fight or flight, puts our body in a state of red alert, with muscles tends to fight back or gain unknown strength. Constant tension can make them rigid and sore. So people, a lot of times complain of a tight neck or shoulders that can lead to headaches. So relieving these symptoms, being mindful of that, and stretching every couple of hours can be helpful. Stomach problems. So stress in our stomach prompts secretion of acid that can cause heartburn, stomach cramps, and other kinds of issues that interfere with our daily life. So kind of avoiding stomach irritants can be helpful in this regard. We don't think of our skin as being susceptible to weakened immune systems, but it can be. A depressed immune system is really easy prey for viruses that cause fever blisters, cold sores, shingles, and other skin problems. And you might notice for some of us, when a weather change occurs, you're more likely to see these things erupt. And that's because it's a shift on our system. Addictive behaviors. We'll be talking more about food and those habits, but that's not the only addictive behavior that can be triggered by stress. Drinking too much, using drugs, online gambling, too much social media exchange, all these things, while we are finding ways to make ourselves feel better, can end up causing not only stress problems that make us tense, but also can affect our health. Next, did you know that 70 to 80% of your immune system is located in your gut? I didn't know that until I started preparing for this training. So if you're stressed out all the time and suffer with chronic stress, your gut and immune system is going to be negatively impacted. Good bacteria in the gut, which helps our immune system function properly under stress, is lowered when it's met with constant stress. It weakens our digestive tract, compromises our immune system. So if the good bacteria is lower, when you think about it, it's more likely that the bad bacteria has a chance to grow. And the weak intestinal barrier allows undigested proteins to get into the bloodstream, allowing for inflammation. And that might lead to new food allergies or sensitivities. So there's a connection, clearly, between stress and irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disorder. Affects our immune system, and it can lead to autoimmune disease. It can also increase the likelihood of GERD, gastritis, which I think of as kind of nervous stomach, or what we call ulcerative colitis, which becomes serious and needs to be treated medically all on its own. Next. So revisiting these powerful hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline, again, this is what spikes when we are engaged in a stressful situation, makes our heart rate go up. It's a stress hormone and responsible for that fight or flight reaction. This increased production can lead to nutrients being depleted because we're looking for ways of managing this, and it's going to go into what's available. It increases the metabolism of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates to quickly use the body. And it's going to deplete magnesium, which is stored in muscle tissue, and will result in depleted calcium, which will accelerate our heartbeat and increase the tension in our muscles. Stress also increases the level of immune response in system proteins called interleukin-6, which we don't need to know a lot about specifically, but has a direct effect on the cells in our body associated with diabetes, arthritis, cancer, and periodontal disease. So I think we're getting that there's kind of a trail and a path here from the way prolonged stress can interfere with other aspects of our body. So next, we mentioned cortisol right in the beginning. This is what increases our appetite and food craving in response to the adrenaline spike. Long-term levels are responsible for the increase in weight gain, and as well as an inability to lose weight. It causes us to increase belly fat and increasing sugar carb cravings. It's a reaction to what's happening in our system. In addition to this list, which increased body fat, diminished muscle mass, bone density, increased anxiety, etc., can also cause change in menstrual cycles, increased menopausal symptoms such as hot flashes and night sweats. The list goes on to include muscle tension, dry eyes, constipation. It's really scary when you think about how powerful this is. And this is really disappointing. The most common symptom of high cortisol levels is the expanding waistline, because our midsection is what kind of protects the organs that are getting triggered by this constant stress. Our midsection tends to hold the weight on. And studies show that people who are under chronic stress tend to crave sugar and have high-fat diets. So it's kind of a cycle that is hard to break. The problem is further that these foods in return stimulate the production of insulin. That's the hormone that lowers our blood sugar, protects us from diabetes. So high cortisol and high insulin causes fat to settle in the mid area around your internal organs. This type of fat causes a lot of inflammation, which in turn can be the underlying cause of other diseases. We've known for a long time that stress is believed to be a contributing factor to roughly 80% of all chronic conditions. So when we look at it that way, and what's at stake it gives us more cause and caution and maybe motivation to get a hold of stress from the front end. So next, we're going to look at emotional eating. So it's a known fact that when we're stressed, we can turn to food. We have what we call not exact eating out of hunger, but eating out of emotional hunger. So how eating and food actually work to anesthetize our emotional distress. The actual act of eating, right? It absorbs us, it distracts us, it feels like a soothing ritual. It accomplishes literally kind of a stuffing down of feelings as we put other things in our mouth. And let's face it, food is the most legal and available mood-altering drug there is. In the short term, it can produce feelings of calm, it numbs us, and gives an instant lift when stressed. Some research says that when we're angry, we reach for crunchy food. When we're depressed, we look for sugary food because sugar triggers a release of serotonin, which temporarily, underline temporarily, creates a feeling of well-being. When we're anxious, we look for soft and sweet. And when we're stressed, we look for salty. So you might think about those things as you become more acquainted with what you might reach for when you're feeling stress. The next slide. So emotional eating really is a coping mechanism, right? We're trying to make ourselves feel better. So we eat to avoid boredom, loneliness, fear, worry, anger, grief, and depression. We're trying to create a neurochemically triggered sensation, well-being, comforting associations with early childhood food experiences, seeking to maintain or obtain a good feeling. And media exposure and ads and all those things don't help us because the image that they try to give us is that that's what food is going to accomplish. The problem is that in the very short term, it does have a sense of satisfaction. The problem is that there's a rebound that sits in our system and affects, frankly, our emotional reactions and can really cause more depression as our system tries to cleanse ourselves of those things. Next. This is a helpful chart that you might make note of. So we look at emotional hunger as something that comes on suddenly. We crave specific comfort foods, feels like it needs to be satisfied right now. With emotional hunger, we're more likely to keep eating, even when we're full. And like a lot of things, it can leave us feeling with a sense of guilt or feeling bad about ourselves. On the other hand, physical hunger occurs more gradually. It occurs as we've burned off the food we've already consumed. We can be more open to food options. We can delay eating. It can wait. We're more likely to be aware of when we're satiated, when we're full, and there isn't any guilt associated with physical hunger. So something that can be useful is a mood food journal. So rating your hunger from 1 to 10 each time you put something in your mouth to increase your awareness of when you might be eating for reasons other than hunger. So next. So what are some alternatives? How do we manage emotional eating? And this is a process. When you have an overwhelming urge to eat, stop, think about that food mood log, and ask yourself how you're feeling at this moment. Maybe do a de-stressing exercise. Many of you may be familiar with the work of Brene Brown, who's done a lot of good work around not only stress management, but showing vulnerability and all kinds of good stuff. Her theory is that when we get triggered by a stressful situation, that we really need to complete the stress cycle to bring us back to equilibrium. And how do you complete that stress cycle? Her theory is a de-stressing exercise, deep breathing, being aware of what muscles in our body might be tensed, doing something different, getting up, walking around the block if you can, around the office, around your house, getting a glass of water, doing something that triggers the end of that stress cycle and helps you to come back to homeostasis. You might try to work towards giving yourself 15 minutes before eating to consider what you're feeling. Now, this is going to be a challenge if you're used to, like many of us, going to munch on something in response to an emotional reaction. The other thing is making a list of things to do when you get the urge to eat, when you know it's not physical hunger. So you do those things instead. You know, we say that gardening, we can bury a lot of troubles digging in the dirt by gardening. So something to keep in mind. Music can be particularly soothing. And these things are going to be different for all of us. So kind of knowing what our go-tos can be and making use of those gives you tools to use when you need them. Next. So, you know, stress is a normal part of life. There's no way that we're going to go through life without stress. It actually provides some energy and zest for living. A moderate amount of stress helps us thrive and succeed. It's when there's too little or too much that your effectiveness is limited. So it's not the stress that harms us, it's our reaction. And ideally, we'll learn to find our personal optimum level and know how to react to that in the face of it. Next. So what nutrients do we need for stress? So magnesium is needed in times of stress because we get depleted of that when we are under stress. Sometimes even thinking about a magnesium supplement can be helpful during stress times. And also then knowing what foods, and we'll talk about that, are high in magnesium. L-tyrosine is something that gets depleted. That really affects kind of our brain chemistry. So L-tyrosine resides in high protein foods, chicken, turkey, cheese, fish. Avocados and bananas have a lot of L-tyrosine. So we're learning to use foods that help combat stress. Vitamin C needs to be increased in times of stress. Vitamin A, studies show that that can be helpful with gastric conditions. We know fish oils help, those omega-3s with joint issues, cognition, watching the caffeine, which can, you know, kind of trigger an adrenaline, and trying to be mindful of processed foods and refined sugar, because these can actually contribute to stress and inflammation, particularly anxiety, insomnia, as well as fatigue. You know, we all are aware and heard of that you get a sugar rush, right? But then it comes down in a way that can be really harmful. Next. So stress building foods and how they work. So foods can fight stress in several ways. Comfort foods, like a warm bowl of oatmeal, can actually boost levels of serotonin, that calming brain chemical. Other foods that we'll identify can reduce levels of cortisol and adrenaline, those stress hormones that take a toll on us. Finally, an overall nutritious diet can counteract the impact of stress by shoring up our immune system and lowering blood pressure. So let's look at some of these stress-busting foods. We talked about that bowl of warm oatmeal. All carbs prompt the brain to make more serotonin. For a steady supply of this feel-good chemical, choose complex carbs, which are digested more slowly. Good choices include whole grain cereals, whole grain breads and pastas, as well as oatmeal. Complex carbs like these make us feel more balanced by stabilizing blood sugar. Oranges, we talked about vitamin C getting depleted by stress. So there's actually a study saying that if before some stressful event that you anticipate, you take 3,000 grams of vitamin C, you're going to lower cortisol and blood pressure more quickly than you would if you hadn't done that. Blueberries are great because of the antioxidants, vitamin C, and fiber. Spinach has high degrees of magnesium. It lowers cortisol. Soybeans have magnesium, kale, broccoli, magnesium and potassium. Fatty fish, again, those omega-3s, salmon, tuna, prevent surges of stress hormones. This is interesting. Black tea, which of course has a much lower caffeine than coffee, has been shown to be helpful to recover from stress events more quickly and lower cortisol. Pistachios lower adrenaline and blood pressure. Avocados have more potassium than a banana and also have a lot of potassium. Almonds have vitamin E and B vitamins, and milk reduce muscle spasms, will do similar to what a magnesium supplement might do, reduce anxiety, mood swings, and PMS. So that's why that tried and true remedy of a warm cup of milk before bed is so important. Next. So as we put this all together today, we've learned that chronic stress increases hormone production, that this causes a disruption in the hormonal system that changes levels of nutrients and needs and increases cravings of carbohydrates and fatty foods, which is going to increase that belly fat and weight gain. Chronic stress is an underlying cause of more pervasive serious issues, including cardiac, cancer, and inflammatory diseases. Learning how to manage stress to avoid disruption in these hormones is essential. Education is the first step, and taking control and committing to some steps follows closely thereafter. Next. So we've all probably seen this list. You know, we say that the go-tos for health, the pillars for health, are sleep, diet, and exercise. So keeping those things in mind. choosing a relaxation technique that helps you. For you, it might be yoga. For someone else, it might be meditation, taking a bath, listening to classical music, whatever it is for you, and knowing what that might be. Taking time for hobbies so that we have a break and a different focus from work and other demands of home. We know connection is very important, that relieves stress, somebody that we can vent to and who understands us. When is it time to reach out? Use the EAP to talk to someone when stress gets overwhelming. You have that benefit that's available to you. Again, learning to relax, trying to avoid hassles that are avoidable. We're not going to eliminate all the stressors in our life, but what might make something easier that you could work on? Work on a more stress-free environment, keeping noise levels down, painting a room a calm color, especially the room in your home with natural light and limiting noise levels. Very important, monitoring your internal conversations. What we say to ourselves is extremely important. And we don't have to believe everything that we say, but being in tune when that internal dialogue goes to the negative or side, or being critical of your own behavior, and turning that around so there's a more positive a mindset, and being able to identify the sources of stress in your life. Again, different for all of us, but what can I identify and what do I want to put in place so that I can handle it better and be more positive about an outcome? Next. So in closing, a pitch on laughter. You cannot have a good belly laugh and be stressed at the same time. It's just impossible. It recalibrates us when we have a good laugh. So laughter reduces our stress hormones and increases the health enhancing ones, can provide a physical and emotional release. It's contagious. Sometimes if you've ever had somebody around you that's just laughing, you'll start laughing and you don't even know what's funny. So it enables bonding with others. It can also produce antibody-producing cells that may result in a stronger immune system, which we all need in our current world. So be lighthearted. Find ways to reduce stress and laugh your way to a healthier mind and body. Thank you so very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.